I would love it if there was some comment regarding the Ghomeshi trial aftermath, where we had these women going through the streets, furiously angry that the judge didn't believe liars.
And throwing themselves naked upon the court steps. Actually, that was quite intriguing. This is actually, I think, what amounts to discussion in the feminist sphere, is that they want to just shout down what they don't approve of. They call you a misogynist. They say you hate women. Apparently, I hate women. As nonsensical as these things sound, it's just a matter of lots of voices, as loud and as flamboyantly as possible. They basically try to override discussion. And what's shocking is that they get away with it. It's one of the challenges I face with my YouTube channel, I think, is that you think of yourself as talking to rational people who are capable of logic. And what we see coming back at us is nothing like that. So that's one of my goals, I guess, is to try and introduce a little bit of rational discussion.
I thought I did, in a way, comment on it by saying that's why you have to have an adversarial system where people get asked tough questions for that very reason. I mean, just imagine. I mean, that is a lynch mob mentality. You just believe a complainant, end of story. Why do we need courts at all? So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty clear on that one. We have to have a system that protects us from our own socio-political biases, and that goes for everybody.
Just as you were talking about before, I was sort of wondering if you had any, I guess, sort of vague legal advice for guys if you are looking to get into a marriage.
Don't do it.
And I know this is everyone's favorite thing, but
Not legal advice. Don't do it.
Not actual legal advice, but in general, what yeah, give me something.
Okay, let me ask you this. I understand restaurants fail somewhere around 45%. Higher? Well, marriages fail 45%, more or less, maybe higher, we don't really know. So would you, if you're coming out of business school right now, would you get married? Would you invest and go on the hook to have to pay support for 20 years maybe and lose half of what you earn? I mean, you'd never do that in anything other than marriage. You know why? Love, love.
Here's some tips. Make sure you're an involved parent during the relationship. And protect yourself. Just be the dad that you may be after separation, be that same dad during the marriage. If you want an equal relationship, your wife is probably going to have to work. So the guys that say, well, I want my wife to stay home and take care of the kids, it's all great, and it's all great while it works, but when it falls apart and the marriage is 10 years or more, you're paying her for a very, very long time. And the older you are when you end the marriage or end the relationship, the longer you pay. And a woman in British Columbia is considered old at about 50. And they're pretty much on the dole after that with spousal support. So you just have to be smart. You have to recognize what the issues are now and what you're facing, and just be smart about it.
I actually just want to add too, I've told people, it's like, my wife would never do that. We have a great relationship. It's like, great, get divorced now.
I had a couple questions, but I'll just stick to one because the lineup's long. Where the law courts only work when the people have confidence in the system, and it could be argued that the confidence is softening. What responsibility or obligation rests with the Governor General or the Lieutenant Governor to step in to maintain or repair the integrity of the Crown?
Yeah, they don't have any say at all. Governor General, Lieutenant Governor, they have no say at all. It's the Attorney General in British Columbia or the Department of Justice in Ottawa. And they're the one that make the rules, and there's lawyers, scads of lawyers working for these two groups, and they bring concepts before the politicians. Politicians decide what they like, tell them, and they write the laws. But the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor General have no role at all to play.
With the very, I would call it predatory nature of the family court towards men in particular, is there any merit in people trying to constitute a new format for relationships using not family law but business law to manage their relationship so that in the dissolution of their partnership they don't end up back in that arena of the family court, rather they have whatever sort of a contractual relationship in the same way that you would with a business partnership, which when it dissolves, there's a distribution of assets and liabilities?
I think to do that, you'd have to have an agreement with the higher courts to send that procedure to your group. Without that, it's like some of these things that that excuse me, First Nations people can set up within their nations. It works if everybody's intending to leave it there. But if someone decides that they don't like the result and they want to go back to the Supreme Court in Vancouver and raise hell, that's a problem.
Yeah, no, that won't work, because the family courts in the provincial court and the BC Supreme Court have said clearly, this is not commercial law. This is not a business deal. These are families, these are parents, these are children, and this is the law that applies to them, and we're not going to apply business law. And I can give you dozens of examples, but I won't bother, but it's not going to happen. Lots of people have argued, look at, treat this contract like a commercial contract. Courts say, not a chance. Not going to do that? Doesn't work.
Hi, so I'm just looking on Twitter here and with the Canadian Women's Federation. So it's really difficult, I find, to get proper, true stats, okay? And I do a lot of research. It's not like I'm just, thumbing around here and there. So it says here, every 6 days in Canada, a woman is killed by her intimate partner. Okay, so that's every 6 days in Canada. So as lawyers and academics and bloggers, what do you feel about that? And if you have a proper stat for me, that would be really great. Compared to men killed by their intimate partners, would be lovely.
More women are killed than men. Every 6 days, so that's 50 a year, roughly? 55, 60 a year? Yeah, that's probably right.
So in relation to men being killed by their...
yeah, there'd be more women killed than men killed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. My question, I'm not sure if it's really a question. I've followed the Ghomeshi trial, and I've noticed a lot of nonprofit organizations and publicly funded organizations using the Ghomeshi name to promote their causes for survivors and victims. And I've tried to share information on the internet with several of them, and they block me. And I attended the YWCA event last night where they were also using his name to promote funding for themselves, and spoke up there as well. So I'm just trying to understand why these organizations are blocking me for simply trying to share information.
Because they don't want to hear you. They've got one agenda, and that's that they're right and everybody else is wrong, and that men are evil, and they don't want an open dialogue. They don't want a discussion.
I'd like to see a group where it's men and women, instead of just the women's group or the men's group.
Mm-hmm.
If men and women could come together and sort this out.
Well, I'm sure there must be groups like that. I don't know of any, but perhaps some of the other panelists do. But
Let me just respond to that. It's a very tragic situation that there are no such groups. There used to be. In the 90s, there was, women have had groups forever. Men started getting groups going and various things, and I did some of that. And it's just petered out. For some reason, women are ever so much better at organizing to get the bread than men.
Really? With the wage gap?
With the government handouts.
In terms of that question about using Ghomeshi's name, I really think it's horrible that a man who was found to be not guilty in a court of law is now the poster boy for something he didn't do, right? Yeah. And they do this all the time. Whenever there's a case that catches the public imagination, they become sort of a poster boy And it's kind of sloganeering. But to be able to do that with a man who was found not guilty is really says something about what the court of opinion is like. And also in terms of being blocked, I don't know. I thought for the longest time that people were deleting their tweets on Twitter for like on massive amounts. It was like so many people quoting stuff, and I'd look and I just couldn't see what the tweet was. And then I realized I was blocked on all these accounts. So I'm just like, oh, okay. Well, I can either do things like log out and try to see what everybody's talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, these are people I've never interacted with, and they just they've heard about me apparently, and they have no interest in what I'm saying.
There's a concept in social psychology called groupthink. Okay, today we have cyber groupthink, where you have groups that form and they block out any adverse information at all through the very means you're describing, but the end process is exactly the same. They're more and more convinced of their absolute rightness of their own dogma.
First of all, thank you all for the work you've done in this area. I really appreciate it. And I'm curious to know what you think. I was watching one of the trolls on the internet, Milo Yiannopoulos. I don't know if you know about him. He's quite a character. And he was saying that the percentage of women in Britain who self-identify as feminists has declined to 7%. And it's dropped 7%. And
that was an absolute number 7.
But I'm curious. One thing I'm wondering about is when you see the extremity of a lot of feminist talk and diatribes, the way they treat each other. What impact is that? Do you think that might be having on the credibility of women in general? Once you step away from the feminists talking to each other and all that kind of stuff, look at how people regard women.
Well, this isn't directly related, but it's an interesting comment, so I'll make it. At the University of British Columbia Law School, I'd say 80% of the women professors are lesbians. And that's what they're teaching. I taught there for 6 years. They didn't like me much. And that's the influence. The dean of law school for 7-8 years was a lesbian. All the profs they hired were lesbians. These profs were teaching family law. So they teach it from that perspective. I didn't teach it from that perspective. And like I said, I wasn't well favored amongst the tenured professors. I was an adjunct professor out there. So that's part of the issue. When you've got lawyers coming out of law school who have been schooled by pretty stringent ideology, feminist ideology.
There was an anecdote in a book called Professing Feminism, written by, I think her name's Daphne Patai, and in which a student in a feminist course was actually punished for being heterosexual. Yeah. Right, which I wouldn't say is true of all feminist courses, but it's certainly something that happens and has been documented by former feminists. I actually wanted to bring up something that I just discovered a few hours before coming to the meeting, actually, in terms of the effect of, why people might not be naming themselves as feminist and so on. There was an article, or a paper, actually, submitted to International Journal for Crime and Justice and Social Democracy. It was very recent. It was written by a professor named Lise Gottel in Alberta. And it was discussing, it's called Sexual Violence in the Manosphere, Anti-Feminist Men's Rights Discourse on Rape. This article's been deleted from the site. I'm going to go about trying to get it available to the public again. But she's talking about, as a legal feminist activist, the loss of the narrative in public, and that the speaking points in the so-called manosphere, all the various aspects of the manosphere, has been growing in effectiveness, and that it's time, she said, for the feminists to listen to some other voices in the feminist community saying, we need to engage with these people in a meaningful way. And the reason is because they're losing. And this article made it very clear they're scared. So I would say that's also why they're losing some numbers.
Let me just my journey was back in the 60s. It was the women's movement. It was equality for women. I don't know anybody that wasn't on that bandwagon. And it went, and one of one of the great things that came out of the 60s. It actually worked. And then feminisms divided themselves into different types. And there's what I call the ones who are no longer for equality but want privilege are the what I call victim feminists or gender feminists. And as I said earlier about the Supreme Court judge, if you take a comment from anybody, a man or a woman, and they make some comment about a man, and you slip the word Jew or black into that sentence, you'll know whether you have an equal sort of person or you've got a bigot.
Hi there. So, Dr. Dutton, you touched on the politicization of court cases now. Following this Turner case, the court of public opinion has been exposed with this. Letters, instead of actual facts being reported, letters purporting feelings. The media is virtue peddling rather than actually reporting on the facts. It's become very difficult to find court cases. Following the Ghomeshi case, I spent about 20 minutes to find the court case, searching through results of, secondhand sources from Huffington Post and the like. Same with the Turner case. It was very hard to find the actual court documents. And following this case, even Joe Biden has come out and said his feelings toward the case. How dangerous is the politicization of court cases in this sense?
It's it's a tough question to answer. I mean, let me just put it this way: you want courts to operate on the basis of facts, and politics, by definition, distorts facts. You get two political parties, it's a tug of war. One tries to pull the facts one way, the other tries to pull it the other way. They cherry pick the data, et cetera, et cetera. They try to spin it as much as possible to their own advantage. So that's not something that you want to have impinging on court cases. I understand it might be difficult to get these. I mean, you might want to take a look at that Duke Lacrosse case, which might be available. I don't know. I haven't tried to get the actual court documents on it, but certainly it's interesting that way. It's never good when a political figure pronounces on a case before the courts. But it goes way back. I remember Nixon doing that. I mean, it just goes way, way back, and people doing that. It just shouldn't happen because you don't want them to be influencing any thoughts that the jurors might have.
Every court case in Canada that resulted in reasons for judgment is online at canli.org, canlli.org. Every case.
Oh, is it L-I-I?
Yeah, L-I-I, yeah, canlii.org.
Okay, so thank you so much for your assertions. I love it so much. I don't know why my sister doesn't allow me to go here today, but I like it. Anyways, my question is short. Since we talk about the different cases on low court and stuff like that, I think it's pretty logical for us to make awareness of the man justice in low court. But since everyone is not literate enough, then how do we approach them to understand this, the law? And
Can I ask you, how old are you?
17.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's just the question. It's just like because so many court cases that men are that is being biased towards female, like for example, false accusation and stuff like that, and how men are seem to not be treated equally. So then I thought it's pretty good for men around me to know about these things. I mean, not like adults, but like around my age, to know about it. So
That's
how
the
do you
value of
approach it?
YouTube that I'm finding. It's like it's a medium where you try to take something that you think people need to know about, put it into a short format as possible. Some of my videos are half an hour, but I try to keep them under 10 minutes. So when you practice doing that, what you can do is you can reach a lot of people who either can't find this information on their own who need the information and actually don't realize they're not the only one who's going through this, and make it accessible in a way. One of the biggest comments and feedback that I get on my channel, even though I'm not a lawyer, a lot of lawyers talk to me about what I'm doing, and they say, you've managed to take like a year's worth of my research and put it into 10 minutes of stuff that's entertaining to watch, right? And this is a platform that's available to everyone. You don't need a law degree to go out and speak about something. You can create a counter narrative to the spin. One of the horrifying things that I first saw with the Brock Turner case, I read a very detailed article going through the entire thing of the evidence of the trial, or like, the trial itself, the outcome of the trial, the sentencing, and the reaction to it. And when I finished that article, I thought I knew what happened. I thought a violent stranger rape had taken place behind a dumpster. And there's a lot more to that case that I think people should look into. And I couldn't figure out how the media could report on this and create such a vivid, inaccurate picture of what actually took place. So we need more people looking into these cases and actually finding out what happened and reporting on it, doing things. It's hard to do a YouTube video. When I first turned my camera on, I forgot who I was. I couldn't think of anything to say. I could only read, right? It's terrifying. I was like rolling sweat down my sides. And I'm just sitting in my living room with the camera on, like what? But you just keep doing it. You have to. Somebody said to me, just do it, just put it up there. And it sucks. The sound quality is terrible. I mispronounce words all the time. But the reality is, you find your voice. And every one of you has an important voice that we need to get vocal. We need to create a counter narrative. So that's, I think, what we need to do.
So our approach is to make them see articles and read stuff like that.
Just go online and Google men's rights. You will find thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of articles, pro and con, and you can educate yourself just on the internet. There's tons of it.
Be the one guy in 12 Angry Men. A lot of you probably haven't seen that, but there's an awesome movie called 12 Angry Men where they went in the jury room. It's almost all in that room, and one guy says, I don't think he's guilty. And by the end of it, they all agree. So in this case, that's maybe, we don't even know if the guy did it or not, but you've got the power of that one voice that if you stay consistent and you're using logical principles and you're being the defense lawyer for these people who don't have anybody in the court of public opinion, that you might be that one guy in the room who ends up letting an innocent man go free.
Hello, I just want to thank you guys for coming and speaking. And there's a lot of good questions here. Kind of feel like you right now. So just going off, I can't remember who it was who said it, but they were talking about how they brought up a man's ex-girlfriends, and they were talking about how he wasn't an abusive guy, that kind of thing. So with my past experiences with something that didn't escalate to there, but even not reading files and cases and stuff like that, do people go to the other side and talk to the girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, and go from that angle and to see what their side is? Does that happen? Like, do they go from both sides? Yeah. And that happens? Yeah. And they still go with the assault charge?
Well, no, I'll take responsibility because that was my case. I was working on that case. Yeah, they checked out the background of the complainant. Turned out she had a track record of lying. She'd been fired from 3 jobs for lying. And he had 3 girlfriends who said he was never abusive a day in his life. That wasn't enough for this judge because 27 years in the past, he'd badmouthed a woman in a bar. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening. Thanks very much for coming out. This question is probably directed towards our lawyers in the group here. Do you agree with the rules and policy in that when a debtor with family maintenance, for example, can have his driver's license and passport revoked when he's got himself into debt? A lot of times when they get themselves into debt, it's because they're both financially and emotionally overwhelmed, and I've found that this is true in the case of a lot of parents out there, fathers mainly.
Well, the FMEP's been around for a long time, and when I first ran into them about 25 years ago, I was shocked that they called people who were simply registered. So mom, mother, wife gets a maintenance order, registers it with the FMEP, and husband, may not be in arrears at all. But any correspondence from FMP to that father, he's now called the debtor. He's not in debt. She just registered with the program. And that tells you the mindset of that program. The reason why they take passports and driver's licenses, because there are people out there who owe hundreds of thousands of dollars for child support. And the law is pretty clear in Canada and most Western countries that as a father, you have to pay child support. It's fairly effective. I've dealt with a couple of fathers, one who fled to Thailand and finally wanted to come back, and I negotiated with FMEP to get his passport back so he could come back. Another guy who was a very well-known broadcaster who used to be on CNN. He stopped paying child support, and he holed up on an island in the Caribbean. And he couldn't leave the Caribbean. He'd been there for about 10 years, and he wanted to leave. And he retained me to try to negotiate some kind of compensation so he could get his passport back and leave that island. And in both cases, we were able to negotiate certain terms where there was certain amounts of money paid. But, you know, he was a CNN anchor. He made lots of money. He decided he didn't want to pay child support. And so that's what those kinds of remedies are for the guys that have the money and just won't pay. I think in cases where you've got an average middle-class family where the award is way out of proportion to what is possible to pay, I think it's a tragedy, particularly when they suggest that we take away a driver's license. When the person, you know, drives taxi or is a truck driver or needs a car to get to work, it's ludicrous. They want you to pay, and then they take away your means of living. But the tough cases are the ones where there's, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars owing, and these guys are gone, and they have money.
FMEP is a privatized collection service that has quasi-judicial authority, which means that it can make decisions which normally you'd expect to have to be made by a judge. And to me, they are proto-fascistic. I call them fascists, but look that up. I think they're proto-fascists. They do more harm than good. Yes, there may be some bad cats out there who are trying to get away with a lot of money, but the vast majority of men are getting stuck because they've lost their job, they didn't have it to begin with, they can't afford a lawyer, and FMEP keeps coming along, and every time you miss something, they fine you. Why are they in the business of making money at that? I mean, you know.
Hey, how's it going? I found your 12 Angry Men and the One Man reference pretty interesting, and I was wondering, with highly publicized and politicized cases we've been seeing in the news, how do both parties eloquently and ethically debate these issues when obviously the majority has been shaped by public opinion, and it's also been quick to label the minority voice with certain labels, and it works for both ways, I see. So yeah, how do we eloquently, ethically debate these issues?
Well, leading up to the trial, the accused in the Ghomeshi case, they're very compromised because what you say to the media can end up working against you in a courtroom. It's actually, from what I understand, the advice of lawyers that you don't speak publicly without advice from your lawyer, without the presence of your lawyer, and most certainly not to the media. So what was going on was a circus of a man who'd been muted, who couldn't respond to things. And, you know, and then his silence was being used against him as well. And I think that's where, like, I wasn't aware of anything. I didn't even really know who Jian Ghomeshi was until about February this year. And I'm not sure what I would have done prior to that. But, I mean, the problem where you step up and try to act like a defense lawyer on their behalf, I think that's a valuable thing to do. It's a lot more difficult until you had stuff coming out in the trial under proper circumstances, revealing the lies, that then basically you're just going to get shouted down as a misogynist, and you know. But there were a number of people that I've spoken to that when he was accused, they actually took that position and they stuck with that position, and now they get to feel pretty good about themselves, right? Because they were right all along. But yeah, that it is a problem when you're accused that you absolutely, I would say, should not speak to the media to defend yourself. So they need people like me and you out there doing it for them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I am a daycare teacher. I take care of infant toddlers in my development work, but I have no custody of my own child. During the trial, the judge said there's too much fathers claim they were primary caregiver. Yeah, that's true for me. A child's mother wasn't in this country before. Judge do not trust. And so she said not happy with me. So that comes my nightmare. And of course, we had a almost equal parenting time. However, and the new Family Law Act promotes equal parenting. And there's removes the term of custody. But the judge makes a sole custody order on the Divorce Act just last year. So, and finally she said she's not happy with me. So that was my nightmare. And I had to sell my house. My child was grown up since infant. And now child had to...
Do you have a question?
Yes, yeah. I just want to know, I to say, I'm not against, I would like to promote any equal parenting. This current legal system is not only against fathers, it's not fair for most mothers. Most mothers upon a divorce, might select a peaceful settlement for a reasonable settlement. But some mothers might not want to fight, even use some nasty tricks. They usually get a better outcome finally. So that's not fair. That encourages parents fighting. So how we can change that? Because from decades, father suffers, and I'm suffers. I do not want my son suffers in the future, facing the same thing. How can we change that? Any protesting on street, writing to MP, anything we can do to help myself, help fathers, and help our children.
Yeah, men have to get together and try to make changes. They have to have groups. They have to attend groups. They have to put their money where their mouth is. They have to fund these kinds of groups. There are some fabulous men's groups in England, and they get a lot of prominence and a lot of attention. They promote men's rights. They do it all over the States. There's not much going on in Canada. And so what it's going to take is men to join forces. The group I told you about, Leading Women for Shared Parenting, the guy who started, it's a man that started that group. And he was smart enough to think, you know what, I can't do this on my own, and I can't get any guys, so I wonder if there's women out there. And there is. So you've got to be creative, but you've got to band together. And there's all kinds of, Cafe is a great group, the one that's sponsoring this event tonight. Got to get involved in these things.
I would also point out to you, like in the Ghomeshi trial, a massive number of the people who supported the work I was doing and followed my work really closely. The most vocal ones actually were women. Yeah. That there's a massive number of women out there who want to have loving relationships with men, who don't like the changes that are taking place, and who are worried about their children's future if we let things keep moving in this direction. So I think that engaging women in this discussion does to some degree help fend off those accusations of misogyny, but also there's a lot of women out there who care about men passionately and want to see this change happen, and their voices can be mobilized as well.
Will this be the last question? Are we good on time? We have a bit more time? Okay, you'll be the last one.
Oh, you're going to hold it. No, thank you. So I agree that there's virtual drive-by shootings and virtual lynch mobs. But I think the problem with this gender issue is us, men ourselves. Being probably one of the oldest people in this room, yeah? You want to compete about that? I too grew up, in social psychology area, in undergraduate and graduate school. And I know we all, many of us, sympathized with women's issues because they were real, right? The position of women in our society was dreadful. And then as my involvement with it got further, what I experienced was a sense of exclusion. And if you read, and I can't remember his last name, but I think his first name is Jonathan, he's a British guy, and he wrote a book called Men's Silences. That men silenced themselves. That because we didn't feel comfortable in the framework of the new feminist movement, and we didn't have any alternative, we either went silent or we bought into the self-help movement, which didn't solve any problems at all. So, at least I don't think it did. It certainly didn't for me. But what I learned from feminism was it got started, I think, because women started telling their stories to each other, right? And so after a while, you build up a conversation or a narrative or whatever you want to call it about what the reality was in women's lives. And they were telling it to each other initially. And then a couple of brilliant women put it together in a book, books. The problem I see that we have is that men don't tell their stories, first of all, to each other, right? I hang out, belong to, participate in a fairly large network of men's teams. And the whole function of the team is to give men an opportunity to talk about these kinds of issues in the confidentiality of a team. But it never goes any further, right? Because we're being confidential, right, we don't actually then come out into the public and say, my story is that my mother, God bless her, was an incredibly abusive woman. And my father wouldn't touch her, even when she came at him with a hammer, a butcher knife, or a glass milk bottle. So for me, I recognized very early on that some men are violent, and so are some women. And so I'm wondering how we can get to a point where men start talking to each other about the challenges we face as men in our society and not worry about blaming women, because they only did what was important to them. And until we start...
Women primarily do what's important to them and what's good for them, right? Now, I'm going to have to disagree with your assessment that women were in a horrid situation and completely powerless in the past. Women talk, they talk behind people's backs, they have gossip networks, they talk way more and way faster than men do, and they have a lot of power and they bragged about it. You'll see in, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, they're laughing about how to get the husband to think he made a decision by saying the man is the head and the woman is the neck who turns the head, right? Women have power and they always have. People who are disabled can find a different type of power to have in the world, maybe their voice, right? People can always find access to power. So that women were powerless, I'm going to have to just disagree with that. But I think that men should talk to each other. I just think that this, what is being called lived experience dialogue, needs to be tempered by a bit of reality, right? So you have women telling their stories, and it's their lived experience, right? But if your lived experience that their lived experience is bullcrap, that doesn't mean anything, right? There has to be some middle ground where their experience is a reflection of reality or not a reflection of reality. And I think men are just far more logical and more practical. The conversations that they have just don't go into these emotional expanse ranges because they want to stay focused, right? goal-oriented on solving problems, and women don't like to solve problems. They like to just complain.
I completely disagree. Completely disagree. Men have been socialized to hide their feelings, and that doesn't work. Women have not. So women share their feelings. They talk about what's going on in their life. My husband always says to me, "Why did you tell her that?" "Well, because she's a friend and I felt like it." "Oh, no, you shouldn't be saying that. You know, that's too personal." But guys have been socialized completely opposite. And the logical stuff and all that, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that you guys are subject to a culture that says you got to be a strong guy, you can't cry, you can't really show any vulnerability or any weakness. There is a guy in Los Angeles who I highly recommend you Google him. His name's Warren Farrell. Do you know Warren Farrell? Yeah. Warren Farrell. Warren Farrell's a good friend of mine, and I've done a bunch of television and radio in the States on panels with him. And you need to read his stuff, and you need to connect with him. He is a great guy, and you could email him, and he would be delighted to discuss these issues. He was appointed to the President's Commission on Men and Boys, a commission out of the White House in Washington, D.C., and he's a major player. He was, believe it or not, about 25 years ago, he was the only male ever appointed to, what was the name of the women's organization? Now. He was the only man ever appointed, and he's about 60 now, and he lives in Los Angeles, and you guys need to connect with Warren Farrell. Is he coming up?
The truth was, when my mother was a little girl, she had three choices. She could be a teacher, a secretary, or a nurse. Now, she didn't suffer, but that was the only choices she had in New Brunswick.
Not very much power.
Yeah, well, so for me, you know,
I think we're running out of time.
All right.
Are we entirely out? No? All right, we'll finish the queue. Just keep them short.
So you guys have talked about the bias that male victims of domestic violence face from police and the legal system. And I mean, I had known about it, but I thought it was just sort of informal, you know, people just sort of had, like, were biased. But recently, you probably already may know about this, but recently I read this document from the BC government, from the Ministry of Public Safety or some sort of ministry, where it was talking about domestic violence and it instructed police and caseworkers and sort of people in the system to, you know, as you mentioned it, have a gender paradigm and assume that domestic violence was used by men, you know, against women, because the document claimed the vast majority of domestic violence was perpetrated by men against women, even though we know that's not true. Right. And so the point is it's not just individuals choosing to be biased, it's the system telling them to be biased. Right. So what can we do about this? How can we change it?
How do we change the world in 2 minutes or less? Let me just say the BC government is an exercise in willful ignorance. I've been writing to them for years, saying them facts for years. I send emails to everybody that's supposed to have anything to say about it, saying, look, here's some simple things you need to know about domestic. I never hear anything back, ever. It's been that way for at least 30 years. When they decided they were going to do mandatory arrest back in the early 90s, I said, well, look, there's this study done that shows mandatory arrest systematically discriminates against ethnic minorities, for example. What about that? I got a misspelled letter telling me to shut up. So I don't know what the answer is with the BC government. I mean, I keep falling back on, well, if I put the facts in front of them, maybe they'll get it. That doesn't seem to work. So, I mean, and it's a multi-headed hydra, because the press in Canada, I mean, there's like, you can count on the fingers of one hand, people in Canada who write about domestic violence the way it really is. Barbara Kay would be one. Doug Todd did a thing on me. That's it. I mean, you know, the Vancouver Sun, it's gender paradigm over and over and over and over. And I keep writing to people there. Daphne Bramham, I keep sending her the facts. She acts like she never received any of it. I know she does. You know, they just glaze over when you tell them, but this is what the data say. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. I don't have a quick answer for how to change the world. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Very quickly, one of the panelists remarked, occasionally a man can't know that he's committing a crime. Taking this to the Brock Turner case, he complied with the investigation the entire way and was sentenced and tried based on his own evidence that his own version of the story where he didn't believe that he had committed a crime. Are laws in Canada as well written in such a way that men cannot know that they're committing a crime while doing one when applied to sexual assault cases?
Well, I think you get cases in sexual assault where the woman herself says she doesn't know if she was raped, and that really does beg, it causes you to ask, if she didn't know, how was he supposed to know, right? And one of the problems with rape cases, there's a terrible moment in a response paper from some feminists to Helen Reese suggesting, is rape different? Maybe we should talk about, is it just assault? And they were very confused by her thinking that sex and rape were different somehow, right? Like, I swear to God, she actually said this, like these two said this in this paper, that they're confused as to why she thinks that sex and rape are different. And that's really kind of where we're headed with these definitions. That the reality is that sexual engagement between two people is very complicated. We have signals, like, would you like to come up for coffee, and things that they're all very subtle. And so, we need to have a very strict line of what's rape and what's just sex gone wrong. That's a very important thing to work out. And in that case, yeah, I think a lot of men are guilty of committing acts of sex, right? Oh. And that's being called rape now, which is a very serious problem. I actually think that rape is a serious crime, and it's a violent crime. If we're talking about something that isn't that, then I don't think we're talking about rape. I mean,
once again, I completely disagree. There's a major difference between sex and rape. One of the major issues in differentiating the two is consent. And when you've got a woman who's passed out, who can't give consent, and you've got, there's 3 cops in Toronto right now. I don't know if you've read the paper. 3 young police officers in Toronto went out with one of the civilian employees, and they were partying all night and went to different bars. And they said to her, let's go back to our place. And when she got there, she passed out, and all 3 of them raped her. And they've been removed from their positions. They're not receiving their pay, and they've been charged with rape. And I don't think there's any. It may have been sex to them, but when you've got a woman who's unconscious, and they buggered her, they raped her, all 3 of them. That's rape.
You can speak to this. I don't think that's what you were talking about.
absolutely not. In the Brock Turner case, actually, I guess it depends on who you believe, but they were both equally drunk, and they slipped and fell behind the dumpster where they were laughing and then started to have a sexual experience. And
he was found guilty, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is like an aspect to it. But that's one thing, and I actually agree that he should have been found guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've got a lot of is regret sex, right? Where
Well, if
they
it's regret
say-
sex, go in front of a judge and get on the witness stand, and the judge will decide who's telling the truth. And that's what they do. That's what judges do. But to suggest that there's no difference between sex and rape, I think that's my opinion. I don't agree with you.
Well, no, that's what the feminists were saying. Yeah, that's what the feminists were saying. And cases where in the Brock Turner one where she was unconscious,
sorry,
I
you're
agree.
not saying that. Somebody else did.
I was
Okay.
feminists.
I'm
glad you disagree.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right, okay. But
I
no,
thought
in
you were
cases where
saying
somebody's
that.
Unconscious,
Oh, yeah,
you got
they're
a clear
crazy
case,
if they're
right?
saying that.
No. But like we're talking about a growing number of cases where there's two people who are out just having a good time. Nobody passes out. Or, they just had an encounter that the woman then says later, I feel like, lying to a woman was actually on a list of things that are crimes on the bathroom wall out at UBC, right? So if a man, yeah. But yeah, there's no mens rea there, and that's an important aspect of law, a more difficult one to explain to people. But.
Hi, so I'd just like a point of clarification. During your response to this man's question, you ended off your statement with, and women complain. Aren't blanket statements like that harmful to advocacy organizations like these? Because it's sort of putting that us and them mentality, and it's not collaborating and working together to figure out the issues, but pointing each other's flaws where
Well,
that's
why
not
I
productive.
disagreed with it. It was that comment.
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of what's going on in the court of public opinion is generalities about the types of power that men and women have. So, sure, okay, not all women are complainers. A lot of women out there are really hard workers, right? But when you talk about, methods of power, types of power, and access to power, then it gets a little more subtle, right? And yeah, sure, okay, it's a hyperbolic statement.
But isn't it harmful with someone with your intellectual status to be pointing out and publicly saying some statements like that?
Stereotypes? Well, there are, yeah, you're okay. No, I get where you're coming. It's kind of a don't fight fire with fire kind of argument, right? So don't make generalizations about women if we don't want them to generalize about men. And, that's true. But there are aspects to conversation where it's useful to speak in generalities in order to address tendencies. And I guess, you could get it really complicated with saying, is gender a social construct or is gender a real thing, right? But there are definitely aspects to women's behavior that we can talk about as being a female type behavior and aspects of men's behavior. Now, do women just complain all the time? Well, I hear them complain more often than men about different types of things, okay? But I think the concern would be if I was sitting here and everything that came out of my mouth was a generalization and something that was completely unfair, to concern ourselves overly with one statement, one sentence that's made, is really just playing into this PC culture of now you can't speak because you said something I disagree with. And I say a lot of disagreeable things. I say a lot of things that people could jump all over and things that could be actually pointed out as wrong. But it's the main core point, and everybody who listens to my channel has the ability to assess what I say and decide if they agree with this, if they don't agree with that, right? But I won't actually be shamed for saying one thing that sounds like it's a generalization.
Okay, thank you all for your great questions. I have one question of my own to end the night, and then Theron is going to come and clarify a few things, and then I'm going to close the event. So my question, which I have to word carefully, without referring to any specific organizations or institutions, what is your broad opinion of universities instituting behavior codes that go beyond what the law dictates?
Free speech codes and conduct codes that campuses are enacting at
Talking about Trinity University?
All of them.
I'm not going to name any specifics,
Okay.
but
Well, that's the obvious one. We have religious freedom in Canada. We also have freedom of speech and freedom of association. The Supreme Court of Canada is going to tell us whether one trumps the other. Right now, there's a number of jurisdictions that will not have lawyers that are trained at Trinity be lawyers. And there's 3 or 4 jurisdictions that have said, we're not doing it. In British Columbia, about a month ago, our Chief Justice said it's nonsense, and our religious rights are on equal ground with freedom of speech, freedom of association, and so he threw out the argument that they can't do what they want. They're a private institution. The Charter does not apply to private institutions. The Charter of Rights of Canada applies to governmental action. The other thing is the BC Human Rights Code has a specific clause that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. And interestingly enough, the BC Civil Liberties Society, who you'd probably agree with me are a pretty liberal group, they are backing Trinity Western University because they see that this is nothing more than, well, frankly, it was started by a bunch of gay and lesbian lawyers. And they are, everybody's very politically correct. And when the Law Society in British Columbia voted to determine whether they would allow Trinity students who are trained with this, this doctrinal theology of Jesus Christ and his tenets, they said 21-6, we're going to allow it. And these are some of the smartest people, some of the smartest lawyers are elected to these positions, and at 21-6, they said we're going to allow it. What happened was a gay lawyer in Victoria and a lesbian lawyer in Vancouver got together and said we're not going to let this stand. And so they organized, and they got a movement going, and they had a vote, and they managed to convince, a lot of lawyers don't turn out, but the ones that were going to vote in favor of not allowing Trinity to uphold their moral and religious principles did turn out, and so it was overturned. But like I said, less than 3 weeks ago, our Chief Justice said, and it will end up in the Supreme Court of Canada, and then we'll see what happens. But the thing is, if it was a public university, it'd be completely different. It's a private university, it's privately funded, and the law permits them to do what they're doing.
To clarify, a lot of public universities are instituting behavior codes.
You're talking about no platforming, that type of thing, right?
Perhaps. Like,
What kind of behavior codes are you talking about?
how to interact with other students.
Well, that's not even enforceable. I mean, what do you mean, how to interact with other students? What, sorry?
Queen's University is a big one.
And what do they want to do? What is that?
They're eliminating types of speech.
Okay, well, that's all good stuff. Well, you shouldn't be a racist. You shouldn't bully people.
How to handle allegations of assault on campus.
Well, call the police.
But they go beyond that.
Call the police.
They go beyond that.
What do you mean? There's nothing beyond the criminal justice system.
Well, they're trying to.
What can they do?
We've got an increasing problem of no platforming of speakers at universities. There's a site called Spiked Online where they track this, and they actually have started doing a study where they rate various universities on their freedom of speech that they have there. So what you've got, the problem that we're looking at is that universities are typically the place for dangerous ideas.
Yeah.
We
Well,
want people to think
this has
about
been going on
things
for
and say
years.
things,
Anti-abortion groups right across campuses across Canada have been shut down regularly. They won't let them have their meetings because they're anti-abortion. The pro-abortion groups, they get to speak. That's the way of the world. Yeah. Yeah,
The risk of dating myself. When I was an undergraduate, they kept Tim Leary from speaking at University of Toronto, but it was the Canada Customs wouldn't let him into the country because they knew that we couldn't be exposed to dangerous ideas because it might just blow our minds completely.
Well,
right?
because
where would we be then?
No, because he had drug convictions. That's why they wouldn't let him in.
Okay, we're going to have some quick clarification by Theron, and then I will close the event.
Let me just end on a rather modest statement. If I were running a law society, I wouldn't let anybody in as lawyers who believed in God.
Before I get to the part you're all waiting for, which is the raffle, I'd just like to thank you all again for coming out. We have these events today so that people might live without the issues we have to talk about tomorrow, so that the man with his kid won't have to go through the same thing he did, right? And this is our 7th event in 12 months. We're one of the most active clubs on campus, and it's all thanks to people like Theron, Anya, Gigi, Gavin behind the booth, and Phil, wherever he's at right now. It wouldn't be possible without people like them, and I'd ask you all to give them a round of applause.